Today's daf we're going to be learning is Yoma daf kavav. I'm going to remind everyone that as of today, this is our last day on Zoom for the next week. And we will start up on Zoom again on Sunday, Erev Shavuot. All the shiurim will still be up. So everyone who's listening, right, it will all be up. It'll even be up earlier than usual by 6 a.m. Israel time. And wait for Erev Shavuot because we have a great daf, perfect for Erev Shavuot, right? If you thought there was good coincidence of finishing Pesachim just before Pesach and spending all this time on Yudalad Shachal b'Shabbat, just wait till we get to Shavuot. Okay, don't look ahead yet. Be surprised. Let's start now with the bottom of Kaf Hamud Bet. We were learning about the Rosh and the Padil. If you remember, we said, why does the Rosh, according to everyone, we saw the different order of how we bring the parts up the altar and who brings them and who goes first. So 4 different opinions, and then, or 5 different opinions maybe. And then we said, because the Rosh, it says, et Rosho et Pidro, because of that, and that's the only part that's mentioned in the Torah, it must mean the Rosh goes first. And then we wanted the Regel to go with it because the Rosh is all bony. Anyway, now we say at the very bottom of the page, V'idach Pader Achrina. There's another pasuk that mentions this Pidro, the Pader. Why did there were 2 psukim that mention this pader? The pader was this fat that they had, part of the fat of the insides of the animal. So why do they mention it again? It's to teach you the following halacha, as it says in a Braita. How would you do it? We're always talking about how it must have been disgusting with all the blood, etc. So there was actually some concern for this. What would they do? They would take the Beit HaShrita, which means the part of the head that was cut off from the body, that was severed from the body. It was very bloody there. That's the Beit HaShrita by the neck where they cut it. So they would take it and they would cover it up. They would smear this fat on it to kind of cover up the disgusting look of the blood. V'zeu derech kavod shamala. And this was a way of showing respect to God, that we don't want it to look bloody and disgusting. And therefore, we put the fat with the head. And that makes sense why the pader goes with the Rosh. Now we're going to the next Mishnah, Hapayas Hashlishi, the 3rd lottery. So again, let's just go back. The first one was the Trumat Adeshen. The second one was, first we had these 4 actions. We're going to split between them a little bit today. That's why I want to make it clear. We had, basically, if you call the second Payas, it's all dealing with the Korban Tamid of the morning. So we have, and I should say the morning, it's a little bit tricky, but let's just say the morning for now. So we have the shochet, the zorek, which we already said, the slaughterer, and then the one who sprinkles the blood, he's also the one who collects it and brings it to the altar. Then, mi b'dashem mizbeach hapnimi, someone goes and cleans the inner altar. Then, mi b'dashem et menorah, okay, then they clean the menorah. These really don't have to do with the Korban Tamid, but they were activities they did every morning. Then, mi maleh v'rim lakedesh, and then we have, and who's going to bring the parts up the ramp, to the ramp. Now notice, they're only going up to the ramp at this point. They put them in the middle of the ramp. Okay, this whole thing, where exactly on the ramp they put them, depending on which korbanot. That's not our issue for today. Then we're talking about the Korban Tamid. So we're talking about the lamb that they bring for the Korban Tamid. Later, we'll talk about how many kohanim do you need. It's like how many people do you need to screw in a light bulb, right? How many people do you need to bring up the lamb? How many people do you need if it's a ram? And how many people do you need if it's a bull? That's going to be the very end of today's stuff. But right now we're talking about the Korban Tamid, which was always this keves. So now they say, so who brings the Evarim to the ramp? How many people? Well, we split the body into 6 parts. Okay, the limbs really 5 plus the insides, the kirvayim. Those are always a little bit separate. So we have the Rosh and the Regel. I'm just reviewing the head and the right hind leg. Again, there were different orders, but order of our Mishnah, Shter Adayim, the 2 back legs. Oketz v'regel, the tail and the other hind leg. Hachazeh v'agera, the chest and the neck. The shtei adfanot, the 2 flanks. The kirbayim, the insides. And then we have 3 additional things, so that's 6. Okay, 5 plus the 1 of the kirbayim. Then we have the solet, the chavitim, and the yayin. Okay, the flour used for the mincha offering that goes with the korban tamid. The chavitim, the dough that you need for the minchat chavitim of the kohen gadol, the mincha offering that he brought, and the wine for the libations. Okay, now the order is a little strange. You would have thought solet, yayin, and then chavitin. We're going to get to that in a few dapim about what was the order that they brought, not only brought them up the ramp, but what was the order they sacrificed them and, to put them on the altar, etc. That's the order. So now that's what we have. So now we're going to say apayas hashlishi. So after they put everything on the ramp, the next thing they have to deal with is, now you might have thought burning them, right? Bringing them all the way up. But no, the third one is chadashim laktoret bo'u v'hafisu. So right. So the next thing they do before we get into the wording here is they do the incense. So they leave them on the ramp and then they go deal with the incense. Right? The incense again is done in the inner altar. What does this mean? Chadashim laktoret bo'u v'hafisu. They say who can come be part of this lottery? Only someone who never yet had a chance to do the ktoret, right? This sounds like a game, I don't know, like hot potato, or in Hebrew they call it chavila overet, right? Where it can only, right, the music goes around and it stops at somebody, but usually they plan it so that it doesn't stop at someone who never had a turn. Now this isn't someone who didn't have a turn today. We assume if someone got a turn today, they're already out. But now we're going to remove anyone who ever had a chance to do the Ktoret, because we only want new people to do the Ktoret. We'll see in the Gemara why this is. Next one, Harivi'i. We immediately go to the fourth one, because we're already done. That's it for the third. Chadashim im yishanim. Doesn't matter if you've already had a chance for this, if you've already done it in the past or you've never done it. Everyone can come. Mima aleh varim min hakevesh lamizbeach. Someone now, a new person, okay, and it's actually tricky to translate this, a new person or maybe new people, it's unclear. It's a big machloket between Rashi and Tosfot on the one hand and the Ritva on the other, who says, how many people brought up, right, we left all these parts on the altar. Now the question is, do we bring from the altar above, does one person bring all of them up? Okay, was it more like, okay, that was the schleppy part, right? It's like bringing in the groceries, right? I keep thinking of that. It's like bringing in the groceries, you put them halfway and then someone else takes them the rest of the way, right? So it was a farther walk. Now it's very short. So just one person brings them up to the altar. Some people say, no, each one is brought by a different person. The same way someone else brought them up individually, each one a different part. Now each one brings them, right? Different people brings each part separately. So it's not clear from here. Just says, who's going to bring them up? We don't know how many people. Is it one or is it six? A few things about this Mishnah. Right. Rashi in Sukkah says, whoever brings it up is the person who now burns it on the altar. Okay, that's also a source of debate. The Ritva says, no, it's the person who sprinkles the blood, he burns it on the altar, because the sprinkling of the blood and the burning on the altar, those are very important activities. Now, even though we say the four main activities are, remember, shchita, slaughtering, Kabbalah, accepting the blood, holacha, walking it to the altar, and zrika. However, if you're going to put anything close to that category, it's going to be the burning on the altar, because that's also a very important part. So is it the person who did that? Or is it, as we call him, the schlepper, right? The person who brought it up, is he the person also who does it? So it's interesting to think about, right? Where does this category fall into, this burning? Is it of that caliber or that caliber, or are we just giving that person the job of bringing it up, right? It's what exactly creates what exactly helps us to decide who brings what? It's not clear from here. But it's clear that there's no other pious for that, so it must be someone who already got a job. Tana, me'olam lo shina adam ba, okay, or lo shana adam ba. Never, ever happened. This sounds like one of those miracles in the temple. It never happened that someone did the incense burning twice. My timer, what's the reason? Right? In other words, on the one hand, you could see why no one ever did it twice, because you always said, chadashim laktoret, only new people. On the other hand, maybe they did it twice. Maybe it happened. Well, there was nobody else. Everyone had a turn and maybe it could have happened. So he says, never happened. What's the reason? Amar b'chanina mipnei sheme'asheret. It causes people to become wealthy, and they wanted to share the wealth. So they didn't want to give someone, if you're already wealthy, you don't need the Torah to get you wealthy. Like I said yesterday, it's like a skula. It's supposed to make you wealthy. See in a minute where they get this from. So Amalei, Rav Papa Labai, my time, he says, what's the reason? Ilema is always a question. If you're going to say from here, I can knock that out. These are verses from Bezod Bracha. It's the bracha that Levi gets. I'll read from the beginning of the verse. It's Dvarim Lamed Gimel Pasuk Yud. Yoru mishpatecha liYaakov. Okay, from Yaakov, you will teach the laws to Yaakov, Shevet Levi. You'll teach the laws. V'Toratcha liYisrael, and the Torah to the Jewish people. Yasim, we'll get to that part of the pasuk in a minute. That's why I wanted you to see the whole verse and understand. Otherwise, you wouldn't know why the Gemara is going to go off on a tangent. Yasimu k'torah ba'apecha, right? You'll be in charge of let's say, you'll be in charge of the k'toret, right? You're in charge of that. V'chalil mizbechecha, and also the mizbachot, right? Putting the sacrifices on the altar. Berach Hashem chelo, and God will bless you. You will have, financial wealth. So they say, if you're going to say, because it says Yasimu k'torah ba'apecha, and then it says Berach Hashem chelo, because you do the k'toret, ihachi olanami aktiva chalil mizbechecha. But it says two things. It says the k'toret and the one who does the olot. Now, nobody says if you do korbanot olah, which, by the way, all the Kohanim were involved in, because there were so many korbanot olah, because many people brought voluntary offerings and everything. It doesn't say they got wealthy. So, to which the Gemara answers, Rabbi answers, Amarle, hashchicha v'halo shchicha. That's very common, and that's not common. Now, you can't say that something that's very common is going to make people wealthy. First of all, maybe you'd say there's not enough wealth to go around, right? And you can't have everybody becoming wealthy, so it must be limited. So if we're going to pick one, let's pick the k'toret, as we saw before, since you can't bring a voluntary incense offering in the temple. Therefore, the k'toret is the one that's obviously not very common, and therefore that's the we're going to say that only the k'toret is the one that makes you wealthy. And also, by the way, the Ritva says that because there's so many olot, you would never have a situation where you could say chadashim. If you're going to connect this idea of wealth with the fact that we have to give a new chance to everybody, whoever hasn't had a chance yet, you wouldn't be able to do that with the olah, because there's too many kohanim there's too many olot to go around, and for sure the kohanim dealt with the olot multiple times. Okay, Amar Rava. I see your question, Shoshana, about the k'toret being the family who deals with the k'toret. They're clearly not reading it this way. They think it's whoever offers the k'toret. It could be that other people say it's Beit Avtinas, but right, we know they got wealthy because they did a deal with the temple and they got double salary for what they were doing. If you remember our famous story in Shkalim. Amarav, lo mishkachat. So since we brought up this Yerumish B'techa Yaakov, B'toratcha Yisrael, which was the bracha to Shevet Levi, that they're going to be the teachers and teaching the halacha, they say lo mishkachat. Rava says lo mishkachat surva merabanan demore. The only two shvatim where we see the people who teach, the only people who are going to paskin, really what they mean is, and we'll see this later, they mean to paskin halacha. The teachers come from Shevet Levi and Shevet Yisachar. That's where they come from. How do we know? Levi dichtiv Yerumish B'techa Yaakov. That was their bracha. They're going to be the teachers. Yisachar dichtiv, and we're quoting a verse from Divrei HaYamim, Chronicles, Ubnei Yisachar Yod'ei Bina Li'itim Ladat Ma Yaseh Yisrael. The Bnei Yisachar know, they have knowledge to understand what the people are doing, which means the way they understand this pasuk is they can decide the halacha. To which the Gemara says, Ve'ema Yehuda Nami, what about Shevet Yehuda? They're born leaders, right? And Dichtiv Yehuda B'chokekei, says they're the ones who make the laws, the legislation. So they say they want to distinguish now between legislation and paskin and halacha. Asuk eshmata liba dehilchata kamina. What I mean is determining that this is the halacha. In other words, understanding enough to determine halacha. That's reserved for Shevet Levi and Shevet Yisachar. Yehuda can be mechokekim. They can legislate. That's something different. I was thinking that, if you think about it, first of all, this is a very difficult passage. We've never seen someone who paskined halacha who wasn't from Shevet Levi or Shevet Yisachar, right? It seems very odd. And many people say that this isn't la halacha, right? The commentaries raise all sorts of questions, probably about themselves, right? Because they're paskening halacha and they're not necessarily from one of those tribes. So whether this is meant to be understood literally, or maybe just to say that these people had something internal, that allowed them to do this. But what's also interesting about this is this distinction between paskening halacha and being knowledgeable. And we know there's Talmidei Chachamim all over, but to be a Talmid Chacham and to pasken halacha are two totally different things, right? If you think about it, there's programs where people learn, just all day they learn. And then there's other programs for people to learn halacha, right? Whether it's smicha programs for men, for women, there's all sorts of programs that are training women to be deciding halacha and paskening halacha for people and teaching halacha. So it's a very different program, right? If you're sitting learning daf yomi, you're not learning how to pasken halacha. We always know that we always discuss, right? We're not getting halacha out of this. Yes, you can once in a while say, oh yeah, you can see the halacha from here, but this isn't a halacha class. It's a very different It's a very different talent that takes, right? You need something different to be able to teach halacha and paskin halacha, to understand all the nuances of how to paskin, right? In fact, a lot of these programs that teach halacha, they learn Gemara, but the focus isn't Gemara because the focus is, what all the poskim say about it. So it's a different focus and it's a different way of learning. It's very different. So you see that from the sugi, even if we don't take this literally in terms of what we're not going to let someone paskin if they come from a different tribe, right? Probably not. But it does show you this difference between that there's some distinction between paskining and learning, having knowledge, etc. You also have to know who you're paskining to, right? You have to have an understanding of people also often to paskin. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. It depends, I guess, what kind of psikat halacha we're talking about. Are you talking about deciding what the halacha is for everybody, or deciding, in a particular situation, what are we supposed to do? Anyway, this is a whole interesting tangent to go off on. Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Back to our topic. Ein mefaisin al talmid shel ben ha'arbaim. Notice what's missing here. We stop the pious in the morning. What about the afternoon jobs, right? We know that many of the activities we do in the morning, we do in the afternoon. What about them? So they say there's no pious for that. So how do you determine who's doing it? Chaos. Ella, Kohen shezachabo shacharit, zochabo arvit. The Kohen that gets the job in shacharit, he does the exact same job in the afternoon. So if you got to bring the rosh and the regel up, then you get to bring it up again. Okay, that's what they say. To which the Gemara says, Meitive, but wait, it says in a Braita, Kashem shemefaisin shacharit, kach mefaisin ben arbaim. Just like you do a pious in the morning, right? So we just saw about these arba payasot. Whichever one of those need to be repeated in the afternoon, we're going to have a separate pious. So it's true there's 4, but there's really more than 4. They just mentioned 4 because some just get repeated. Kitanya. No, that's not a contradiction. That's talking about the incense, that there's a separate, right? You have a separate pious for the incense, but not for the korban itself. The Hatanya, they say, how could you say it's talking about the incense? Because we'll bring you a different braita where it's clear they're not talking about incense. And for this, you have to know Hebrew grammar. Just like we do the pious for it in the morning, you also do the pious for it in the afternoon. Now, what is for it? Now, in English, for it could be the ktoret or the korban tamid or the sacrifice. But in Hebrew, lo is masculine and the word ktoret is feminine. And the word korban or tamid is masculine. So because it's masculine, it must be talking about the sacrifice. So that again goes against Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan's an MOI. You can't go against a Braita. So aim Allah, they say, fix the wording. It was a mistake. It shouldn't have said lo. It should say la. Okay. Then the Gemara says, but wait, Vahatanya, but we'll bring a third Braita. Right? First they brought a Braita that didn't have any word like lo or la. Then they brought one that said lo. We said, change it. Now, Vahatanya, kashem shemefaisin lo shacharit, kach mefaisin lo arvit. Kashem shemefaisin lo shacharit, kach mefaisin la arvit. But wait, this one says both lo and la. You can't say change lo to la, because if you change lo to la, then you wouldn't need both sentences. So clearly it says here that you need a pious also for the korban tamid in the afternoon. So Amar Rav Shmuel bar Yitzchak, hacha b'Shabbat eskinan. You can claim that Braita was only referring to Shabbat. Why is Shabbat different? That you need a pious also for the afternoon. Ho'ilu mishmarot mitchadshot. In the middle of the day on Shabbat, in between the korban tamid of the morning and the korban tamid of the afternoon, the groups of kohanim would switch. If you remember, each group, it was the mishmar, it was called mishmar kuna. Each group came for a week. They swapped weeks in the middle of the day on Shabbat, which means the Shabbat afternoon, you can't have the same people who did it in the morning do it in the afternoon. So you need to bring in you need to do a new lottery in the afternoon. But now the Gemara asks, what were they thinking in the beginning? We have a huge problem. If you're going to say that they did a special pious for, in others, when they started questioning Rabbi Yochanan, and they said, but wait, there's pious also in the afternoon, it doesn't make any sense. What were they thinking? Nefishalu payasot, and we don't have 4 lotteries. We have more than 4 lotteries because you're going to have to do everything for the korban tamid in the afternoon again. So it's going to be more than 4. So they say, no, according to them, that there's a separate lottery. It doesn't exactly mean it's a separate lottery, but maite kulu mitzaf ra'atu. In the morning, when they did the lottery for the korban tamid, who's going to carry this part, who's going to do the shlita, who's going to do the sprinkling of the blood, what they would do is they would have 2 lotteries for each job. And they would say, okay, we're doing the morning now, And then they say we're doing the afternoon. So it was all part of the second pious. And they would do it all at the same time. They didn't get up in the afternoon and do a new lottery. They did the lottery for the afternoon in the morning, right? Someone had asked me, why wouldn't they do it the night before? So here you see, they do plan in advance, but they wanted to do all the activities during the day when the temple was full of people. Remember, we talked about wanting there to be a commotion and everything else, but it didn't matter. It doesn't have to be right before you do it. So in the afternoon, they didn't need to do it in the afternoon, just did it in the morning while they were in the middle of doing that anyway. So now we have this fourth pious, which is to, right, they quote the part of the Mishnah that's not really relevant to our purposes, which is that, right, anyone, even if you've had this job, you can have it again. So we talked about some people put it on the ramp and then other people bring it from the ramp up to the top of the altar. Okay, and then we said it's a debate. Do they also burn it or does someone else come in? We're going to see that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov disagrees with the Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov omer, the one who brings it up the ramp, he's the one who puts it on the altar, meaning you might split the job. You do the first half, then you stop, then you do the k'toret, and then you bring them up all the way. Okay, so for a little point, it's there, but whoever brought it up halfway brings it up the rest of the way. So now the Gemara is going to say, what's the root of their machlok? And it's very interesting. It goes back to the grocery analogy. So right, coming back your house with grocery bags. Mar savar berov am hadrat melech. Right, better to have the most people involved, right? I like when I know I'm getting home, I call my kids, I say, listen, I'm coming home with groceries, come out and meet me outside, right? It's always nicer to do things with more people, especially in the temple. We want to get as many people involved. So therefore, we're going to have as many people as possible bringing parts up, which would also then support the understanding of the Ritva that says 6 people brought it up, right? So that you could have even more people and not that one person brought up all the rest. So they want as many people as possible. But Mar Savar, Makom Shchina Lav Orach Ara. Right? Some of the times I'm a little bit lazy, right? I bring in the groceries and I say to the kids, okay, you bring it the rest of the way. I brought it from my car to the door, you bring it the rest of the way. Now, if you do that with a sacrifice, it looks like you're being disrespectful of the sacrifice. I brought it halfway. I don't really want to bring it the whole way up. It doesn't look good. It doesn't have this aspect of looking like you start the job, you finish the job. You bring it in the house, you bring it all the way, and you put it in the kitchen, right? Maybe a better analogy is, let's say one of the kids brings it in and they just leave it, right? They say, oh, I helped you bring it in. And they just left it by the door, right? That doesn't really help me. It needs to get into the kitchen, needs to get unpacked, finish the job. So maybe that's what's going on here, that there's this lack of respect to God if you just kind of leave it in the middle of the ramp and don't actually bring it all the way up. Okay, now Amar Rava. Lo Rabbi Eliezer ile de Rabbi Yehuda, v'lo Rabbi Yehuda ile de Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Where's Rabbi Yehuda come in? Rabbi Yehuda had this opinion about the machta. Remember we saw yesterday that the one who gets the k'toret, he just brings along someone to bring the pan with the coals into the inner altar. So there's no real pious for that. So now they're going to say that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, who doesn't have this pious revi'i, we assume that they all agree there's 4 payasot. So Rabbi Yehuda will say, I don't, right, that there's no machta. What is there? There's maleh varim lakevish instead. And Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov will say, no, there's no maleh mea kevish lamizbech. So Rabbi Yehuda will say, that's the 4th one, bringing it all the way up. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov says there is no pious for that. Whoever did it before does it all the way. In which case he would say the 4th pious is bringing, that there must have been, he thought, a separate pious for bringing in, right, those. So the 3rd is the k'toret itself. The 4th is who's going to be his support team to bring in the coals into the inner altar. So therefore they say Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov can't agree with Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda can't agree with Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. They don't work together because you'd end up with 5 lotteries and not 4, or actually you'd end up with less, right? You would have, if you don't have Maleh and Lakevish and you don't have the Machta, you'd only have 3 lotteries. So it can't be that either one holds like the other. And if you were to find a Tana that says 5, now it's not that they really had someone who held 5, but they suggest that if you found someone who said 5, you would say they think there is a pious for the machta, and there's a pious, right, for the pan with the coals, and there's a pious for bringing all the items up to the altar. Okay. Tosfot has an interesting question here. He says, Temali, I don't, if you look at the last Tosfot on the page, if you say there's 5, you could add this one that we said before about the afternoon one. Then maybe that's the 5th one and has nothing to do with Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov and Rabbi Yehuda. And maybe even they could say there's a 5th pious. They might not have the machta, or they might not have the bringing this stuff up to the altar, but they would add this other one, right? And then you could have that. So they're saying, right? So he gives some answers, but anyway, it's an interesting question. The Tosfot suggests that you could actually really have 5, even according to them. Okay, new Mishnah. This is one of those Mishnayot that likes to do a count of there could be 9, there could be 10, there could be 11, there could be 12, no more, no less. It's like the famous Mishnah in Megillah, which talks about what days can you read the Megillah, the 11th, the 12th, the 13th, the 14th, the 15th, not before, not after, depending on where you live, etc. So this is the same style Mishnah. Tamid karev b'tish'a b'asara b'achadasar b'shneimasa. The Korban Tamid is brought. How many people bring up the parts? Now again, going back to yesterday's Mishnah, that's why I started with it. There's 4, the shochet, the zorek, the cleaning of both the mizbeach and the menorah. That's the first 4. Then we have 9 of carrying the parts up to the altar, whether it's the body parts of the animal or the libations and the mincha offerings. So now they're talking only about that second part of the Mishnah, not about the first part, right? The first 4, those are out right now. We had 13 in that Mishnah. So 13 minus 4 is 9, right? We have 9 left. So Tamid is karev b'tisha, that's what we saw. But now they're going to say sometimes basara, sometimes 10, sometimes 11, achadasar, sometimes b'shnei masar, 12. Lo pachot velo yoter, no more, no less, just like in Megillah. Ketzad, how so? Atzmo b'tisha, right? The regular one is 9. B'chag, on chag Sukkot, b'yad achad zluchit shamayim, harei kan asara. One Kohen brings up water for the water libation. Remember, they pour it onto the altar. At the top of the altar, there's these holes, and in the holes, there's these cups, kind of like a funnel cup with a hole at the bottom. And they would pour in that cup, and it would go down in the hole. And then the hole, there was like a pipe that went all the way down. It would go into the ground. That's where they did the water and the wine libations. So now they say, so on Chag Sukkot, where they do this every day of Chag Sukkot, they pour these water libations. Right, that was because of the rain. It was a special thing connected with the rain. That's why they used water. We had the Shiur Hamayim. That's where they brought the water in to get to go there. Ben ha'arbayim be'achadasaf. Every afternoon, they would have 11 kohanim involved. 9 for all the things we saw. Hu atzmo b'tisha. That's the regular afternoon sacrifice. You'd need 9 kohanim, right? Whether or not it needed a separate pious or not, that doesn't matter here. That's not our issue. Remember the 2 logs? Remember there was the maracha with the crisscross logs. There's the maracha ktana, the smaller one. And then on top of the maracha gdola in the morning, they would put 2 extra logs. Okay. Now we're going to see that they did it also in the afternoon. And we're going to talk about the differences between them. In the morning, whoever did the Trumat Hadeshen of the altar also did the Shnei Gzirei Etzim. So if you notice, only 1 Kohen did it. In the afternoon, 2 Kohanim did it. And we're going to have to see why. We'll see it in the Gemara. B'Shabbat be'achadasar. On Shabbat, there were 11 people. Why? Hu atzmo b'tisha. So the Korban Tamid was 9. U'shnayim b'yadam shnei b'zechei l'vona shel lechem hapanim. 2 Kohanim, each one would bring one of the bowls with the frankincense that went with the lechem hapanim, the showbread. U'b'Shabbat shebetoch hachag b'yad. Sorry, I skipped. Sorry. B'Shabbat be'achadasar, that I said. Okay. U'b'Shabbat shebetoch hachag. Sorry, I didn't skip. I was waiting for it to say 12, but it did then say 12, but it means 12. The 12 comes from where? Shabbat shebetoch hachag. Now you have, right, it's both Shabbat and it's Sukkot. So b'yad achad zluchit shamayim. In addition, you have the water libation. So normally you have 11. Now we're going to add a 12th. That's how we got to 12. So the Gemara starts off and says either Rabbi Abba said this or Rabbi Bar Chama, Rabbi Yochanan, or Rabbi Yochanan said this. They only did the Nisuch HaMayim in the morning. They didn't do it with the Korban Tamid in the afternoon, right? Some things were done twice a day. This one was only done once a day. How do we know? Mimai. We can learn it from our Mishnah. Which meant you add one more person to do the Nisuch HaMayim. If you do it also in the afternoon, Then you would have 12 on every regular day because you'd have one for Nisuch HaMayim in the morning and one in the afternoon. I can also prove this from another source, Tanaitic source. The person who's doing the water libations, they say, raise your hands up high. We want to watch you do the Nisuch HaMayim. You'll see why in a minute. One time, he just poured the water on his legs. Okay, he didn't want to pour it in that hole because he was a tzduki, and the tzdukim don't believe in Nisuch HaMayim because Nisuch HaMayim doesn't appear in the Torah explicitly. It's a drasha on all those verses about the korbanot of Sukkot. It says v'nisrehem, v'nisacham, and there's like a drasha. We'll get to it another time where they darshan an extra mem, an extra yud, and an extra mem, and they get to mayim, and from there they learn water libation, special for Chag Sukkot. The tzdukim didn't agree with it. So the tzdukim, again, we keep going back to this. The tzdukim, one time, a tzduki poured it on his legs. And again, we're going to have this situation where after something happens, they change things around in order to make sure it doesn't happen again. So they changed and they said, you always have to lift your hands up so that we can all see and make sure you're not pouring it on your leg. Now, what does this have to do with the morning? How do we know they only did this in the morning? Because what happened? They pelted him with their etrogim. Okay, this comes up, by the way, in a number of situations where they took their etrogim and they threw it at people. And right, sounds like tomatoes, right? You throw tomatoes. So they had etrogim. Why they have etrogim? It must have been in the morning when they had their lulav and etrog, right? Generally, it was taken in the morning, not in the afternoon. So from there, you see that it happened in the morning, okay, that they would do it in the morning. It's not the best proof because you could say that happened to have happened in the morning, but maybe they also do it in the afternoon. Anyway, Shema Minah, from here, you can infer that it was the morning. So they say the water libations were in the morning only. Tanya. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai Omer. Now we go back to something I mentioned. I said we get here. How do you know? Two people bring one each one brings a log. As opposed to in the morning where only one kohen brings two logs. So now we're going to look at the verses. Before I read the verse they're quoting, I want to read you two psukim. Vayikra Vav, pasuk Hey first. We've seen this already, right? The fire is on the altar. Lo techabet, should never be put out. Ubi'el aleh kohen etzim baboker. Every morning the kohen comes and puts on the wood. Va'arach aleh olah, and then he puts on the olah. V'iktir aleh chaber shlamim. Okay. Then two psukim later it says v'natnu b'nei Aaron kohen esh al mizbeach v'archu etzim ala esh. Then it says that they put the esh al mizbeach and then they put the etzim ala esh. Now it already said they put the etzim ala esh two psukim ago. So why do you need both psukim to say that? So they say, Shene'emar v'archu etzim, and notice there's two differences. One is they repeat the same thing, almost the same thing twice. In the first pasuk, though, it says, Ubi'er aleh kohen etzim, they burn up wood. In the second pasuk, it says, V'archu etzim, they set up wood. And in the first verse, it's singular, Ubi'er aleh kohen, singular. In the second verse, it's plural, so you can see where this is going. But it never says afternoon. So, right, it only said baboker, and pasuk hey, two psukim later, it just says, and the kohen puts them on the fire. So they say, you don't need pasuk zayin to talk about they put wood on the fire, on the maracha, in the place where the wood was. They add these two logs in the morning, because it already said, already said he did that. It even uses the word arach there. So you wouldn't need it. Therefore, this is the classic. We keep seeing this, which is, if you don't need it for this, then it must be coming for some other reason. So it must be for the afternoon. But then they say, maybe it's both. And maybe it's coming to teach you. Maybe the Torah is saying you have to do it twice. Bring two logs and then bring two logs again. So they say, then it should have said in one place, uvi'el, and it should have said, if they want you to repeat it, they should have used the same word, uvi'el. So then the Gemara says, they're being a little nitpicky here. Well, it couldn't say uvi'el, because ikatav rachmani uvi'el have a min achad in trei lo. Even if you're going to say it was twice, we're going to assume the first time was one person, the second time was two people. So don't say that they would say both singular. In other words, when they gave the suggestion, they kind of, I would say, almost made a mistake. And the way they worded it was ubi'el. They didn't really mean that, but they get taken literally. And they say, what do you mean ubi'el? Would have to say ubi'el, ubi'aru in plural at least. So they say, right, you would have thought if it said ubi'er, that each time you only need one kohen to do it. So therefore, you would need ubi'er, you'd need both to tell you one is one person and one is two. So then they go back and they fix what they were saying. No, in kenem ubi'er ubi'aru. Inami va'arach va'archu. My uvi'er ve'archu. Shma mina kedikam b'rinan. What they focus here is there's two differences. Number one, it's singular plural. That teaches you one the first time and two the second time. But also it uses a different verb, even though it really means the same thing. Why would it use a different verb? To teach you this is done at a different time. And that's why you learn one is in the morning, one is in the afternoon. Tani Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia said our Mishnah a little bit differently. He had a different version. We said 9, 10, 11, 12. We ignored those first four things of the who slaughters, who sprinkles the blood, who cleans both the mizbech and the menorah. But he had Yud Gimel, Pamim Yud Gimel, Pamim Yud Daled, Pamim Tevav, Pamim Tet Zayin. Sometimes 13, sometimes 14, sometimes 15, sometimes 16. This is simple math. Add 4 to all the numbers in our Mishnah, and you get the same thing. He just included the first 4 because he was talking about the entire second lottery. But doesn't it sometimes, isn't there a brayta that says 17? Where do you get 17? So they say, this line is very difficult because it really should be, and Rabbeinu Chananel changes this, that it's not like Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov and not like Rabbi Yehuda. In other words, Rabbi Lezer, what we're saying is the 17th person is the one who says, in addition, you have both bringing the Evarim to the up the ramp, which Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov didn't think there was a second payis for, and the Rabbi Yehuda doesn't think you have the Machta, so it's not like him. Okay, it's this whole section is a little difficult because anyway, none of those were in the second payis. So there's a bit of a question about what exactly is going on here. There's different versions of the text. I'll leave it up in the air a little bit because it's very hard to explain, right? Each commentary is kind of a difficult line. New Mishnah. Okay, so now, as I said, we're going to talk about different animals. As the animal got bigger, there were a few things. The animal was bigger. The body parts were bigger. It was harder for one kohen to bring each part. Secondly, the libations were bigger, if you remember, right? There's lakfasim, lailim, ve'lapa, right? Each one has a different measurement of, we say it in Musaf all the time, right? How many eslonim of solet and how much of the wine and the oil were brought with the libations. So it was, each one was a bigger quantity. So therefore, each one is going to need more people to carry things. So ayel karev b'achadasar, we need 11 people. Why? Habasar b'chamisha, the meat is actually the same. All the different parts of the animal aren't that much bigger in the ram. Remember, the ram is an older kevesh. Remember, it's the second in its second year, so it's bigger, but not that much bigger. Hakavayim, the inner parts are actually much bigger, so you need 2 people. Hasolet v'hayayim b'shnayim, each of those are with 2 people. So you end up with 3 things that are with 2 people, that's 6, plus the 5 body parts, that gets you to 11. Par karev esrim v'arba'a. How so? Harosh v'haregel. So they're going to have like topic, and then we're going to go into it. So the rosh and the regel, which normally was done with 1 person, now we're going to have harosh be'echav v'haregel b'shnayim. The head is big, you need 1 person to carry that, and the regel is big, you need 2 people to carry it. So that's already 3. Ha'oketz v'haregel, ha'oketz b'shnayim, v'haregel b'shnayim. So again, each of those parts needs 2 people to carry it, right? The tail and the hind leg, the left hind leg. Ha'chazeh v'hagera, the neck and the chest. Ha'chazeh be'echav v'hagera b'shlosha. Okay, the gera is 3 because they say that the gera connects 3 different parts, the liver, the heart, and the lungs, if I remember correctly. So because of that, you need 3 people to carry each of those parts. Again, they're big. So each leg now needs 2 people. 2 flanks, each need 2 people. And the inner parts and the solet and the yayin each need 3 people because again, right, the first one needed only 1. The second one was more of a, more for the ayil. You needed 2. This one needs 3 people, and that's how you get to 24. This is all in communal sacrifices. But if it was an individual sacrifice, anyone can do it. Okay, now who decides? It's very complicated. So Rashi points out, Kohen Yechidi oseh et hakol ubelow payis. You don't need any sort of lottery. It could be, it means you didn't do a pious, but maybe you came up with some other system. Some people say that maybe they did it themselves. Like, not they did it themselves. Whoever brought the sacrifice would decide, I want you to do it, right? They could kind of choose their Kohen. You can't choose any Kohen. It would have to be a Kohen who was working that week. Sorry, I made a mistake before in my counting. The Shtei Yadayim B'Shnayim and the Shtei Tfanot B'Shnayim is, and the Kirvayim B'Shlosh, right? The Shtei Yadayim B'Shnayim is each leg is held by one person. And the Shtei Tfanot is each flank is held by one person. I just want to check that. I was wondering if I said that right. So that was a mistake. So I corrected myself. Now we have, so this is all Korbanot Tzibor, not Korbanot Yachid. Im Ratzah La'akriv Makriv. Okay, so Korban Yachid, there was a different, right? Here it sounds like anyone who wanted to could, obviously that creates all those problems all over again. How you're going to resolve those issues, but maybe there was less of a desire to do the individual. Maybe there was more desire to do the communal ones. Or maybe after they already divided that evenly, then everyone was kind of calmed down already. When you're taking off the hide and cutting up the body into parts, then everyone is shavim. What does it mean? Elu ve'elu shavim. So the Gemara is going to start off and explain. It means that you don't even need a Kohen to do those two activities. They're just kind of, getting it ready for putting them on the altar. You don't need a Kohen to do that, to which I'm going to leave you for now, but we're going to see Chizkiah is only starting today. It would be silly to stop in the middle. Chizkiah starts trying to prove to us, how do we know they have Shaitan and Nituchan or Bizarre? We're going to have a number of attempts to try to figure out how we know that that's the case, that a non-Kohen is allowed to do Hefshet and Nituach. With that, we'll end for today, and I will see you all personally in another week and a bit. And you can all keep following on the podcast, on the website, on the YouTube channel, all different multiple ways to be learning. Have a Shabbat Shalom, everyone.